You join me now outside the Crown Court, where shortly we're expecting to hear details of one of the stiffest penalties ever imposed for failures in health and safety management in the construction industry. It was just over a year ago that a scaffold collapsed on a construction site, killing 3 16-year-old apprentices, and the world saw these dramatic pictures captured on a mobile phone.
Look out!
We've had scaffolding collapses in our industry before. Look at this one. Or this shoring collapse. But because no one was killed, we slip them into our next safety presentation and get a few laughs. What idiots, we all agree, and pat ourselves on the back for our continuing efforts in the management of safety in our organisations. However, the only thing that separates near misses like these from fatal accidents is the outcome. These contractors, site managers, whoever was responsible, got lucky. They fouled up, but no one was killed. But in this accident, no one got lucky. A chain of events caused by people taking shortcuts and failings in safety management reached a point where it only required one more thing to tip the balance. And that thing was blowing in the wind. The people responsible for ensuring the safety of a scaffold are generally the manager of the scaffolding contractor, his on-site supervisor, and the main contractor's site manager, who is ultimately responsible for health and safety on the site. We'll call them Tom, Dick and Harry. And we'll begin with Harry because what happened on that fateful day started with him. Harry had worked for his scaffolding company for over 10 years. He could erect an independent scaffold in his sleep and often joked that he had. On this particular job, though, everything was behind schedule, and in the construction industry, that means over budget.
Harry, just a man.
Yeah?
I need you to modify the tyres on the
It wasn't unusual to be erecting and dismantling scaffolding under a time constraint, but Tom, the site manager, was putting Harry under added pressure and insisting that he use fewer ties.
Take those out and the whole thing's going to be top heavy. I mean, especially if you put any extra weight up there.
Look, Harry, you and I both know there's more than enough tyres without that top row. We'll have the windows installed in a day. Come on, just help me out. Yeah, we're behind as it is.
Right, OK. All right.
Cheers.
In the witness box that the prosecution brought by the health and safety executive, Harry took a bit of a mauling.
Is it true that your company issues strict guidelines for installing scaffolding ties, but that you ignored these procedures and installed too few to properly secure the scaffold?
We used the right number of ties. I mean, except we left out the top row. That's because the site manager didn't want them getting in the way of where they were installing the windows.
Your Honour, I'd like to draw the jury's attention to Exhibit 1, which is the engineer's drawing for construction of the scaffold. Mr. Smith, is this the design drawing issued by your company detailing how the scaffold was to be built?
Yes.
Does it show the correct number and spacings of all the anchor ties?
Yes.
And is it your job to ensure that the scaffold is built to the specifications and drawings issued by your company?
It is.
So why didn't you?
Because in the real world, customers are always demanding changes like this.
So you did ignore your working instructions and left out the top row of ties?
I just did what the customer wanted.
Harry did what the customer wanted. But did he do the right thing? No. Despite all the pressure he was under, he wasn't working alone. No one works alone when it comes to managing safety. It is a shared responsibility. Harry had options. He could have asked his manager for advice, which he did. He telephoned him, but as usual, Dick was on another call. So he left a voice message for Dick to call him when he was free.
Yeah, I've got that fact.
Dick spent the days before the accident working in his office. As the branch manager, he was responsible for dozens of contracts and relied heavily on his site supervisors to look after the day-to-day operations on site. He did get Harry's voice message, but he didn't respond straight away, and ultimately he forgot. Recently, his branch had been issued with special equipment for testing anchor ties, but he hadn't had time to organise the training required to use the equipment. He was still using a specialist subcontractor to proof test anchor ties, and their test record for Harry's project was somewhere on Dick's desk. Dick told the court his version of events.
I had intended to visit the site, but other jobs took priority. In the real world, getting out to site is hard. That's what you have supervisors for.
So, you didn't visit the site, you didn't respond to your supervisor's voice message, and you didn't read this tie test record. Exhibit 2, Your Honour, which clearly showed that the ties were inadequate for the loading that the scaffold was subjected to.
I can't remember seeing the tie test records for this project. But even if I had, these results wouldn't necessarily have set alarm bells ringing.
Does this tie test record indicate that the ties were inadequate for the loading on the scaffold?
I didn't know ties had been left out.
Just answer the question, please. Does this tie test record indicate that the ties were inadequate for the loading on the scaffold?
Yes, but I wasn't aware of the windy weather. The site manager gets a copy of the tie test record when we hand the scaffolding over. He's there all the time.
So what exactly did you manage then?
What is this real world they keep referring to? In the real world, getting out to sites is hard. But apparently you can spend hours and hours shuffling papers, hoping that your supervisor is on top of the job. This tie test record, the one that Dick should have looked at, and which should have set alarm bells ringing, states that the ties in the scaffold should have had a minimum safe working load of 6 kilonewtons of force. But the test results showed that it only had an average safe working load of just over 2 kilonewtons. In other words, it was less than half as strong as it should have been for that scaffold. When a project is already running late, the last thing a site manager needs is visitors.
Is that a new phone, Kate? Let me have a look. Phil B.
But that's often the way with accidents. A project falls behind schedule. Mistakes are made trying to speed things up. The weather turns bad. And suddenly a long-arranged visit by apprentices from the local construction college has to be accommodated.
Okay, so what you see here is the refurbishment of the old warehouse that's very, very nearly finished. It's part of a much larger project, as you'll see when you look over at phase 2 over here. Let's take a look at that. As you can see, prepare the groundwork.
Distracted by the visit, Tom had not considered that the weakened scaffold had taken quite a battering from the wind during the night.
Around about 9 months' time, we should be
With the wind still gusting, the remaining anchor ties were subject to forces beyond their limits.
Experts have testified that the scaffold collapsed due to insufficient and understrength anchor ties for the loading that it was subjected to, and that your instructions to the scaffolding supervisor to leave out the top ties was a main cause.
With hindsight, I can see that the wind load factor was more considerable than I'd realised, but the anchor ties had been tested, and no one had brought to my attention that the test results were on the low side.
You mean no one at the scaffolding company?
Someone should have been alerted by the tie test results, even the person who did the testing.
So you didn't think to check the tie test results yourself? Despite knowing that you had already weakened the scaffold by insisting that the top ties were left out against the wishes of an experienced scaffolding supervisor.
The witness will answer the question.
No.
I've said it once, and I'll say it again. No one works alone when it comes to safety. It's a joint responsibility, both at the management level and the individual level. Tom, Dick and Harry all had opportunities to take preventative action. And as Tom said, even the person who tested the anchor ties could have said something rather than just faxing off the tie test record and assuming that someone else would pick up on the low readings. They all thought they were working in the real world, a world which, in their eyes, included giving in to pressure, making compromises, taking shortcuts. Not one of them showed real safety leadership, despite their training and experience. You see, over and above productivity and cost, it all comes down to how important safety is to the company culture. That is where the real world begins. And that is why what happened on that day is my responsibility as well.
Pounds for a project like this, yeah? Look out!
Unforgettable pictures there of the shocking moments when scaffolding collapsed, killing 3 16-year-old apprentices and injuring 1 other. Well, we understand that record fines are expected to be handed down to both the scaffolding company and the main contractor, but the families are calling for charges of corporate manslaughter to be brought against the directors of these companies. Earlier today, I spoke to the mother of one of the victims.
Somebody needs to take responsibility for this. I lost a son. Other families lost loved ones. And these men in their grey suits, they stand up and they talk about their excellent safety record and how it was just a tragic series of events that never should have got that far. Well, it did. And they need to go to prison for it. Because that's what they've given us. A life sentence.
The chief executive of the construction company at the heart of this story is expected to make a statement soon. In fact, this is him now. Mr. Turner! Mr. Turner! Mr. Turner! What do you have to say to the families of the victims? William, do you have any thoughts about the likelihood of corporate manslaughter
for your company after this result?
Corporate manslaughter. What do you have to say to the families of the victims?